Hi, everyone. Let's take a few minutes to discuss the significance of travel in Othello. Now, you recall that travel outside of the pilgrims' hometowns and places of business is significant in Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. Not only does the pilgrimage provide an audience for the pilgrims' tales, without it, the tales could never be told. As we'll see, the move from Venice to Cyprus is equally important in Othello. Although cunning Iago probably would have been able to devise a way to meet his goals had the character stayed in Venice, he would have had to use different tactics. The movement to Cyprus is absolutely necessary for the action of the play to unfold as it does. The source for this presentation is literary critic Alvin Kernan. The play opens in Venice, a highly civilized city with a sophisticated method of justice. When Brabantio accuses Othello of drugging or using black arts on Desdemona to get her to marry him, the disagreement is presented to and decided by the Senate. The decision is made by a body of objective men based on rule of law, not by a single person whose judgment might be colored by emotion or a personal goal or agenda. Now, according to Alvin Kernan, Venice is an example of the concept of the city, the actual and symbolic stronghold of government, social concord, reason, and law. The city in literature usually represents the carefully maintained balance between individual freedom and the social restraint that guides the lives of people who live in groups and have a shared interest in the welfare and survival of the group. While social constraints certainly include laws, they go beyond what is codified and punishable. They include the standards of acceptable behavior that guide how we interact with each other, and it's these constraints that make living in groups possible. The opposite of the city is barbarism. Locations that are believed to be governed by something other than rule of law and believed to be essentially free of social restraint, according to Kernan. Now, it's important to recall that there was very little travel in early 17th century Europe. There were no cars, trains, or planes, and travel by ship was arduous and dangerous, which restricted boat travel to mainly trained sailors. There were no international mass communication outlets. There was no CNN World News. Many people never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. Even those who were considered widely traveled seldom left the area we now call Europe unless they were explorers or traders, according to Kernan. And Kernan tells us that there was a growing awareness that there was a world beyond Europe during the 17th century, but people had no idea what that world was like. Now, Othello, the character, provides some clue of what the general view of the so-called barbaric world outside of Europe was in Elizabethan England when he tells the Senate that he had encountered cannibals and people whose heads grew beneath their shoulders. Europeans did know that others were not Christian. In fact, the word Turks was a general term that was used to refer to non-European Muslims, not people who were necessarily from Turkey. At that time, certainly any group that was not Christian was considered uncivilized. But as we're going to talk about in a later video, the confusion and curiosity about people outside Europe is one of the burning questions of the early 1600s that Othello actually explores. Now, between the city and the barbaric, non-European wilderness were outposts such as Cyprus, and that's where the majority of the action of Othello takes place. According to Kernan, Cyprus, as a military outpost, is not the citadel of civilization that Venice is. Othello himself describes Cyprus as a town of war yet wild in lines 212 and 213 in Act 2, Scene 3. Because Cyprus lacks the social sophistication of Venice, there are fewer restraints on behavior. And then in addition, because Cyprus is a military outpost, decisions are made as they are in the military. not by a group of objective men such as the Senate in Venice, but by the highest ranking military officer. Now, once Othello reaches Cyprus, he is the highest military officer and is, in essence, the law. Now, Iago wouldn't have found it as easy to manipulate Othello with lies had the group not traveled to Cyprus, and certainly Othello wouldn't have been in a position to act as judge, jury, and executioner in punishing Desdemona. If the group had stayed in Venice, as soon as Desdemona learned that Othello believed she was cheating, she would have turned to her father, who would have taken the matter to the Senate. Desdemona would have been able to prove that she had been a virgin on her wedding night by presenting the marital bedding. Othello then would have been asked for evidence of Desdemona's infidelity, which would have led to Iago's testifying before the Senate. Now, while Iago is a skillful liar, and he's certainly skillful enough to avoid being seen as a liar, the incident of the handkerchief would have come up, and it would have had to have been explained. Cassio also would have testified to the fact that the conversation that he has with Iago that enrages Othello was about Bianca, not Desdemona. Chances are that no one would have died because no one would have believed Iago's accusations. In other words, the action in Othello is possible only because of travel. While Iago would have doubtless found other ways to hurt and possibly destroy Othello, they most likely would have dealt with issues that didn't involve legal points that could be addressed by the Senate because he would have wanted to avoid that kind of investigation. His scheme only works because until the final scene, the various people that he manipulates don't talk about his actions so that they can put the pieces together. And a Senate investigation would have put that puzzle together much more quickly and without bloodshed. Iago's methods would have had to be even more subtle so that he could avoid detection, and it would have taken much longer to lead to Othello's fall. It's travel that makes the action of Othello possible.
Okay, that covers what I think you need to know about travel in Othello. As you can see, just as travel was necessary in the Canterbury Tales in order for the pilgrims to be able to tell their tales, travel was necessary for the plot of Othello to proceed as it does. If you have any questions, you know all you need to do is email me through Canvas. I always want to hear from you, and I particularly want to help you any way I can. We'll talk again soon.